Time Travelers Are Tourists, a Conspiracy Corner mini-documentary. The conspiracy theory that time travelers are already present among contemporary populations, specifically disguised as tourists, occupies a distinctive niche within modern speculative belief systems. It combines familiar motifs from science fiction, such as temporal displacement, advanced technologies, and historical observation, with recognizable features of tourist behavior, including transience, documentation, and conspicuous consumption. In its most common form, the theory proposes that individuals from a future era travel to earlier periods to observe, record, or subtly influence events, adopting the social camouflage of leisure travelers to avoid scrutiny. While lacking empirical substantiation, the claim persists in popular discourse, thriving in environments that reward pattern recognition, anomaly hunting, and narrative completeness. Beliefs in clandestine outsiders have a long pedigree, from folklore concerning disguised deities to early modern anxieties about spies and infiltrators. The time traveler as tourist variant is comparatively recent, emerging in tandem with 20th century developments. The expansion of mass tourism, the popularization of time travel in literature and film, and the increasing availability of cameras and recording devices. The theory's plausibility for adherents is partly drawn from the fact that tourism itself is a socially sanctioned form of observation. Tourists arrive without deep local ties, ask basic questions without shame, photograph ordinary scenes with unusual intensity, and depart quickly, behaviors that, in another context, could be interpreted as reconnaissance. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the ubiquity of smartphones and global travel further reinforce the narrative. An individual behaving oddly in a public square, absorbed in a device, recording street life, consulting maps, can be simultaneously typical and suspicious. The conspiracy theory capitalizes on this ambiguity, treating the tourist persona as an ideal cover identity for a visitor whose true origin must remain concealed. Although the theory varies across communities, its central propositions tend to remain consistent. It assumes that time travel is feasible, often achieved through advanced physics or technology beyond present-day capabilities, and that the past is accessible without consequences so catastrophic as to prevent repeated visits. It further presumes that observation is permitted or incentivized, whether for historical study, cultural anthropology, or leisure, and that concealment is necessary to prevent disruption, paradox, or interference with a timeline. Within this internal logic, tourism is presented as an optimal disguise because it provides a ready explanation for outsider status, knowledge gaps, and compulsive documentation. Many versions incorporate supplementary assumptions that add structure and specificity. Some suggest that time travelers carry devices disguised as cameras or phones, or that they operate under strict non-interference protocols. Others propose that travelers concentrate on high-interest moments, catastrophes, celebrity appearances, and political events, where observational value is presumed to be greatest. In more elaborate tellings, the theory merges with adjacent concepts, including multiverse hypotheses that reduce paradox concerns or timeline management narratives that imply a future institution regulating access to earlier eras. The selection of tourists as a cover identity is central to the theory's plausibility within its own framework. Tourism legitimizes intense filming and photography, which can be framed as vacation behavior rather than data collection. It normalizes geographical dislocation, unfamiliarity with local customs or transit, and brief interactions that reduce opportunities for sustained scrutiny. It also provides a social explanation for eccentric consumption and unusual clothing, both of which can be dismissed as foreign fashion or the indulgences of travel. In global cities, linguistic diversity and shifting accents further enable concealment through perceived foreignness. Supporters of the theory typically rely on a form of reasoning characterized by the accumulation of anomalies. They cite historical photographs said to depict anachronistic technology, such as smartphones, earbuds, or advanced cameras, and present these as inadvertent captures of temporal visitors. They point to individuals whose clothing or grooming appears inconsistent with a recorded era or setting, and they interpret certain behaviors, moving against a crowd, focusing intently on mundane details, or appearing unusually detached as signs of observational intent. Another recurring claim involves coincidental appearances at major events, where similar-looking individuals are alleged to recur across different crowds and dates, framed as repeated visits to moments of high historical value. The evidentiary approach is generally retrospective and selective. Images are slowed, enlarged, and recontextualized until ambiguous shapes resemble devices, and ordinary attire is cast as evidence of temporal origin. This practice resembles amateur forensic analysis in form, but it rarely includes standardized controls. Alternative explanations are not consistently tested, and contextual data such as provenance, dating, restoration methods, or digital artifacts may be incomplete or absent. In viral media ecosystems, the chain of custody for an image often degrades rapidly, complicating any serious assessment. A notable feature of the theory is its reliance on the ordinary. The alleged time traveler is not presented as a dramatic intruder, but as someone almost indistinguishable from the surrounding crowds. This near invisibility is treated as confirmation rather than a weakness. If concealment is necessary, effective concealment should not announce itself. As a result, the theory often becomes difficult to falsify in everyday terms, since both conspicuousness and inconspicuousness can be interpreted as consistent with the claim. Any failure to detect time travelers can be reframed as proof of their competence. The persistence of the tourist time traveler narrative can be situated within broader patterns of conspiratorial belief formation, though it is comparatively less accusatory than conspiracies centered on malice or domination. Human beings are predisposed to detect patterns, particularly in noisy data such as crowd photographs and low-resolution video. The concept offers narrative satisfaction by providing a coherent story that explains anomalies without requiring mundane explanations. Online communities reward novelty and discovery, incentivizing interpretations that transform ambiguity into revelation. In addition, time travel is deeply embedded in modern storytelling, supplying ready-made conceptual tools, protocols, paradox rules, and hidden observers that can be applied to real-world scenes. The theory can also be read as a commentary on contemporary social conditions. The notion that unknown observers are studying us resonates with an era of pervasive surveillance, data capture, and constant recording. The idea that ordinary life is continuously archived makes the image of covert observers psychologically legible, even if the proposed mechanism, literal time travel, remains speculative. In this sense, the theory operates as a symbolic extension of systems that already watch, record, and analyze human behavior, recasting those systems as visitors from the future rather than institutions of the present. From a scientific perspective, the hypothesis faces substantial obstacles. Time travel, insofar as it is discussed in physics, is typically associated with highly speculative constructs and conditions not known to be achievable, stable, or safe. The claim that travelers could operate widely in public spaces without leaving verifiable traces would require extraordinary assumptions about concealment, energy use, and causal interaction. Moreover, the primary forms of evidence advanced by proponents, ambiguous images, and anecdotal reports, are especially vulnerable to cognitive and technical errors, including pareidolia, confirmation bias, and the distortions introduced by scanning, restoration, compression, and context loss. At the same time, the theory's conceptual elasticity supports its durability. The more advanced the hypothetical travelers are presumed to be, the less likely they are to be detected. The less likely they are to be detected, the more the theory relies on ambiguity. And the more ambiguous the evidence, the easier it is to interpret selectively. This self-reinforcing structure allows the narrative to persist even in the absence of robust corroboration. Several related variants coexist alongside the tourist disguise hypothesis. Some accounts frame time travelers as archivists preserving knowledge of endangered cultures or pre-catastrophe environments. Others adopt a catastrophe tourism model, suggesting visitors are drawn to disasters and turning points analogous to modern dark tourism. More institutional versions describe regulated timelines in which a future authority licenses visits and enforces non-interference, while commercial variants imagine a privatized industry in which wealthy patrons purchase excursions to iconic eras. These versions frequently borrow the language of travel, packages, guides, and restricted zones, further naturalizing the premise by analogy with contemporary tourism industries. As an empirical claim, the proposition that time travelers are presently among us, disguised as tourists, remains unsupported by credible evidence and is inconsistent with established scientific and methodological standards for extraordinary assertions. Nevertheless, it is significant as a cultural artifact. It reflects contemporary conditions of mobility, documentation, and mediated reality, while offering a framework for interpreting the strangeness of public life. Crowds filled with unknown observers, ubiquitous cameras, and a world in which nearly everything can become a record. For documentary purposes, the theory is often most illuminating not as a literal description of hidden visitors, but as a lens through which to examine how modern societies construct plausibility by rearranging familiar elements into a single proposition that the observers among us are not merely from elsewhere, but from elsewhen.